What's up, and welcome into our final mailbag of the offseason here on Fantasy Baseball Today. Frank Stanfield joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show about half and half with your emails and Apple Podcast review questions. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the audio side, make sure to download, follow, and leave a 5-star review. Really appreciate it. If you missed any of our recent shows, you can always go back and listen on demand. Big thanks all off season to those who sent in a question. Apologies if we didn't get to yours. I mean, there are just so many, and I mean that in a good way. I'm not complaining, but it's just a lot to get to. Reminder that if you are sending in an email, fantasybaseball@cbsi.com, try to keep it as concise as possible. I look through the emails. We get like these essays, which I appreciate, but it's just harder to get to when they're super long emails. Let's jump right in, and we'll start with this one from Jake. Quick question regarding two players I've noticed falling in my drafts who I'm not particularly interested in, but feels like I'm missing out on some value with how late they've fallen. At what point in ADP do you feel the need to draft Michael Harris and Jacob deGrom?
Well, I've said before, Michael Harris, while I do have him as a bust candidate this year because he just, for as much as he puts the ball on the ground, for as bad as his plate discipline is, it seems unlikely his batting average and home run rate are going to improve, and it seems more likely they're going to get worse. So I do have him as a bust candidate. However, having said that, outfield is a position that becomes very scarce very quickly, and especially in like a standard roto league, 5 outfielder league. If Michael Harris is there in the middle of round 3, I'm probably going to take him because there is that possibility of 5 category production at a very scarce position. And, you know, at the end of the day, I'm only so confident in my bust claim for him. So I don't mind taking him at that point. I don't think he has to fall that far for me to be persuaded to take him. deGrom is a different story. I also have deGrom as a bust this year, but I'm so confident in his inability to hold up over even like half a season that I've actually moved him down quite a bit in my rankings, just to the point where I can feel pretty confident I'll never be faced with the prospect of taking him. He's between like Aaron Nola and Shane Bieber for me in my starting pitcher rankings.
Chris, I don't know if you had anything. It sounded like you wanted to say.
Yeah, with regards to deGrom, I have no confidence in his ability to stay healthy. I also don't have much confidence in my ability to project injuries, so he's still 35th overall for me. He's actually in between Aaron Nola and Shane Bieber for me as well. It's just I have Shane Bieber apparently a little higher, or Aaron Nola a little higher, excuse me. So I haven't drafted him. It's unlikely that I will, but I'm less opposed to it than I think Scott is. Michael Harris, I have him as a bust as well, for all the reasons that Scott said. I also have him on I wrote this last week, I think the players I need to draft at least once team. Maybe you could call it the FOMO league or FOMO team, just because like he was the number 12 outfielder last season, despite playing, I think, 114 games, which is 1, a measure of how impressive Michael Harris was, and 2, a measure of how unimpressive the rest of the outfield crop was, that a player who only played 114 games was able to be a top 12 option. But there's obvious skills there. He's fast, he's athletic, he hits the ball really hard. He's the kind of player that just needs small improvements in his batted ball data to take a huge step forward. So I'm certainly not entirely opposed. And if he's there, for me, it's more like the end of round 3. I have him 34th. So if I'm picking first overall, 12th overall, and he's there at the end of round 3, I'm happy to take him. But I usually don't, I would say.
So Jacob deGrom, I just looked this up. I have him at 37 in head-to-head points, 38 in roto. That's early round 4 in a 12-team league. I've never seen Jacob deGrom last that long. So kind of similar to you, Scott. I just kind of lowered him to the point where I don't think I'm going to get Jacob deGrom. Same thing could be said for Michael Harris. I have him at 49 in head-to-head points. That's early 5th round. I haven't seen that.
That's his worst format. Is that what this question is addressing? Head-to-head points? I don't think so.
No, I'm just hitting on both because they didn't mention.
Gotcha.
And then in roto, I have him at 44. So middle of the 4th. Again, I never see Michael Harris.
You really hate him.
No, I don't hate him. I don't hate anyone, Chris, but I'm a little bit worried about just the things that we continuously bring up. He completely make me look stupid. I realize that with Michael Harris, but I just wanted him at a point where I make a statement and I'm just not going to draft Michael Harris this year. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. This one's from Daniel. I'm in a 14-team, 9-player OBP keeper with no restrictions on our keepers. While I have a decent team, I don't feel like I'm in a position to win my league, and I was thinking about taking some high upside / risky picks that I could probably never acquire if not for injuries. Lars Newpart is the exception. I was thinking of taking some of the following players, and I'd love if you could rank them, not this year, but for their long-term upside. So we've got Royce Lewis, Alex Kirilloff, Lars Nootbaar, Seiya Suzuki, Walker Buehler, and Michael Kopech.
Well, Buehler's easy number one.
I think so, yeah.
Coming back from second Tommy John surgery, so I don't think it's a slam dunk he resumes being an ace. But
and there were troubling signs in his performance last year, even before he got hurt. So,
a lot of times that is a precursor
Sure.
to a Tommy John surgery. But yeah, worth noting. I would still say is he has enough of a history as a true ace that he's the most likely to be a huge asset beginning of next year. Second, I think we got to go Nootbaar at this point. Third,
I think
Royce
Nootbaar and
Lewis.
Suzuki probably have similar upside.
Yeah.
But obviously Suzuki's a little older, less development left. So I think it's fine to put Nootbaar ahead of him.
I don't think there's a clear order beyond Buehler.
Yeah.
I would go Buehler. You know what? I'm actually going to go Royce Lewis over Nootbaar because
That's fair.
Yeah.
More assurances in what his role is going to be when he
Coming back
returns.
from his second ACL tear.
Even so.
Yeah.
So Buehler, Royce Lewis, Lars Nootbaar.
I would go Suzuki over Kirilloff, but I think Scott's going to go Kirilloff over Suzuki
I still love Kirilloff
because he was really
upside.
good in the minors 3 years ago.
No, he was really good in the minors last year.
No, I
Come
know,
on,
I know.
his numbers were ridiculous.
I'm joshing you.
Does he even have a wrist left, Scott? I feel like every time we talk, they've shaved another part.
Yeah, they're just shaving a little bit down it's like I was going to make a dumb joke.
So
It's fine.
we're pretty much out on Kopech as an upside play then? Is that where we're
Yeah,
indicating here?
he got very few swings and misses last year once he moved to the rotation. And his overall numbers weren't terrible, but his velocity's been down in the spring, I'm pretty sure. And he hasn't pitched in a game yet in the spring, has he?
He has.
Okay. But I definitely know he's been behind and I don't know. It's possible because he's talked about how, last year he had to learn how to pitch because he didn't have, the velocity that he's used to, but he also still doesn't. So I don't think it's going to happen for him.
Yeah, I think it's Buehler at the top. Some order of Royce Lewis, Lars Nootbaar, Seiya Suzuki in the middle, and then it would be Kirilloff and Kopech for me on the bottom. I would probably take Kopech over Alex Kirilloff, but that's because I'm like the anti-Kirilloff, and Scott hates me for it. So
It's all right.
let's move over to Chris. This one is Chris Towers. Hi, Roy, Leslie, and Ted.
I saw you highlighting this one. Apparently you've missed the cultural sensation that is Ted Lasso.
I mean, Chris, are you surprised by at all?
Scott, have you watched it? The only two people. Oh, you have. You don't like it.
I have,
Oh.
and
Contrarian Scott.
Yeah. So I guess you missed my most trafficked tweet last year, which was simply Ted Lasso sucks and you all deceived me.
Wow.
Jeez.
Wow. What a hater.
What is that show even about? I have no idea.
It's about people.
It's about
and their
friendship.
feelings.
It's about the friends we made along the way.
It's a little vapid at times, I feel like, but we don't have to get into it here. I cannot recommend Ted Lasso with the same enthusiasm that I recommended Parks and Recreation a week or two ago. Parks and Recreation is, I think, a much better show.
Wow, really? You're talking about Ted Lasso for being vapid and then pumping up Parks and Rec. Wow.
Maybe.
You just earned yourself 5
inconsistency.
Emails. 5 emails, Scott, are coming in with Scott's take on Ted Lasso as the subject line. So there you go.
I do like it's better than Space Jam.
I did like the Nate twist at the end of season 2. I thought it had a chance of maybe giving the show a little bit of teeth. I don't know where it's gone at the start of season 3, but that did offer a little hope for me with Ted Lasso.
All right, well, let's answer Chris's question. I'm in a daily head-to-head points league with a weekly starting SP start limit, so SPARPs are not really an advantage. However, because of the format, I figured that would mean the opposite would be true, where RPs as SPs, or otherwise known as RPASPs, I just kind of coined that a couple of years ago, our former starters who are now relievers would have additional value, since we also have 3 points for holds, 7 for saves, who might be some relievers that might fit that eligibility and give me an advantage. So I looked into this on CBS and for Yahoo, because I think that's where most people asking this question probably are playing. And on CBS, Matt Bush with the Brewers, John Brebbia with the Giants, Andre Palante with the Cardinals, Jalen Beeks with the Rays, Matt Brash with the Mariners, Jordan Hicks with the Cardinals, and Keegan Thompson with the Cubs. And then in Yahoo, it's a lot of the same names. It's Matt Bush, JT Chargois with the Miami Marlins, Scott Alexander with the Giants, Jalen Beeks, Keegan Thompson, John Brebbia, Andre Palante. This is a very specific question. I don't know if you guys have any names off the top of your head, but these are the ones that I could find.
I think it's probably not really worth the I think the juice is probably not worth the squeeze in this instance. I've never played in a league like this, but my thought is you're probably chasing relatively thin margins that aren't worth the roster spaces that you're using, but I can see them being useful throughout the season, just not necessarily people you'd want on your team throughout the year.
We've had people ask some form of this question in the past too. So, I mean, it's probably a pretty small audience, but I think if you play in a daily head-to-head points league with the lineup set up where it's like 2 SPs, 2 RPs, and like 3 or 4 pitcher spots, yeah, I think if you can pick up some holds or just some random reliever points from, these guys in your SP spots, then why not? So those are the names that I would target there. This one's from Andrew. Hi, Levon, Robbie, Richard, and Rick.
It's Levon is how you pronounce this, and this is the band.
Oh, who's that, Chris?
Levon Helms, Robbie Robertson, Richard Manuel, and Rick Denko. They were originally Bob Dylan's backing band in the 1960s. Then they went off to do their own thing, released one of the greatest albums of all time, I think in 1965, music from Big Pink. Great stuff. You've heard The Wait, I'm sure. That's probably a song that you guys have heard.
So this is Bob
The Last
Dylan's.
Waltz is one of the greatest concert movies of all time.
All right. I mean, I grew up on all this kind of old classic rock, folk rock, I don't know what you want to call it, type music with my dad. So I've heard the songs. I just don't know what they're called. So I probably have.
And you've definitely heard the Wait.
I'm sure I have.
Music from Big Pink came out in 1968. Apologies for spreading fake news.
How's the weather over there? Have you guys given any thought to what happened last April with poor hitting and maybe going very pitching heavy in the first month, trying to get as many starts in as possible while the weather is bad? If so, which cities should I look to stream pitchers in? Now, this is very specific. I think the first name that comes to my mind, Scott, and you've already brought it up, is Marcus Semien. He struggled last April, and I feel like he gets off to a slow start every year. So there's one, but this is something, while it was happening last year, I kind of thought about it too. I'm like, maybe we should stream more starters earlier in the season in April if we think offense is going to be down.
You're talking about quantity, like having more pitchers on your roster to maximize 2 start weeks. Is that what you're talking about? Because I don't know that it makes sense to target pitching like early in drafts. And then what do you do when the cold spell's over? You trade them all away.
That would be the idea, is that you take advantage of people, I guess, not remembering how the season went last year. But like last year, if you bought low on hitting and sold high on pitching, just as a general rule, you probably came out ahead in April.
I mean, I don't play in leagues that are active enough in trading. Maybe my dynasty leagues are, but the seasonal ones, there's not an active enough trade market for me to feel confident in that strategy. So that's A. B, it was cold basically through May last year. It was like May 20th that finally started to warm up around the country. So it was just a really cold start to the season. And Marcus Semien was somebody who struggled, especially the first 2 months, not just April. So that's B. C is it was unseasonably cold. If memory serves, it was unseasonably cold in California in particular early last season, which exacerbated the issue. So I'm not a weather forecaster, but I don't think we should treat like I do think there's something to the idea that with the ball being stored at this certain temperature and humidity, it's not going to carry as well in cold weather as it has historically. But I don't think we should treat last year as the norm in terms of how long that cold weather will last and how widespread it'll be. So I wouldn't advise that approach. I would advise, though, if you happen to draft Semien or you happen to draft somebody who's playing in cold weather early in the year, to not panic about a slow start if it is a hitter.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think as a general rule, though, Chris, what you were saying is if you could look to buy low on hitters that have a true track record at the end of April. Maybe if they get off to a slow start, maybe it's weather related. Maybe it's just a slow start to begin the season. I think that makes sense. And maybe sell high on some, pitchers that we don't really trust to keep this going after the first month of the season also makes sense as well.
I do want to bring it up here because it's somewhat relevant and I've been wanting to say it. Ozzie Albies. Remember we were worried about how his power would translate with the new ball because the most we saw of him last year, he struggled in the colder environment. He does have 3 home runs in 12 games this spring. So I think that's an encouraging first sign. Obviously it's warmer where he's training in Florida than it's going to be at a lot of places in April, but we were worried how his power would play even mid-season with the new ball. Small sample, of course, but I think it's an encouraging first sign.
And as for the last part of that question, cities and where you could stream pitchers in, I wouldn't overdo it, but obviously the ones in like the middle, northern, northeastern part of the country, I think make a ton of sense. Like New York, just looking at the divisions, New York, Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Minnesota, Detroit, Cleveland, honestly, the entire AL Central probably. AL West, Seattle. No, but they have a retractable roof there. They do, right? Seattle? I believe they do.
I would assume so. It famously rains a lot in Seattle.
Yeah. Philadelphia, Washington, those make sense. St. Louis, Chicago, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, but bad teams there. So you get the idea. Let's move on to our next question. This one's from Andy. We already drafted in our 14-team Roto Keeper League. I give Teoscar Hernandez and Andrew Heaney. I get Luis Robert. Do we value Luis Robert that much higher than Teoscar, or are they similar enough to keep him and avoid the injury risk of Luis Robert?
I think that's a fine trade. Yeah.
Yeah. It's more I don't have confidence in Heaney holding up. It gets trickier since it's a 14 team and not the usual 12 teamer. So you have to value depth a little more than we normally give it credit for. But I mean, best case scenario for Luis Robert is, I think, still potentially first round production, and Teoscar Hernandez doesn't have that in him. So I think I'd do it.
All right. This next.
By the way, T-Mobile does have a retractable roof, so nobody has to follow up with that.
Yes. This one's from Scott White.
Different Scott. Dear
Marcus, Seneca, and Zeno.
Those are Stoic philosophers. I did have to look it up, but I did read recently a book that touched on the Stoic philosophers, so I kind of knew what it was.
I saw Seneca there, and I was wondering if it was Wallace's. Remember Seneca Wallace? No?
That's probably the only Seneca that I am aware of, Scott.
Yeah, okay.
I had a college roommate named Seneca.
Interesting.
Not a great guy.
Does the Jose Altuve injury impact Kyle Tucker's value in a significant way? If he moves into the number 2 spot in the lineup and ends up keeping it for the rest of the season, would that bump in counting stats push him into a comparable value to Julio Rodriguez? Maybe slightly less upside, but slightly more of a floor. Kyle Tucker currently dealing with an ankle injury as well. It doesn't sound too serious, but the first thing that came to mind when the Altuve injury happened is that Jeremy Pena would be pushed up the lineup. Now, Michael Brantley is probably going to start the season on the IL as well. So I don't know. Maybe we get Pena and Kyle Tucker.
Well, I haven't been monitoring the Astros lineups, but Roster Resource does have as the Astros projected lineup Pena first and Tucker second.
Yes.
With this injury. Now, of course, Jose Altuve, the timeline more officially now is late May, early June, which I think is what we were thinking all along. So it's not a situation where he's going to miss more than a third of the season. But I think the gist of this question is if Kyle Tucker performs well enough in the number 2 spot that Dusty Baker isn't inclined to move him out of it even after Altuve returns. It's just a lot of ifs. You know, it's not something I think you can count on. And I was saying yesterday, I still like Juan Soto more than Tucker. I'm back to moving Jordan Alvarez ahead of Tucker. This news doesn't change that in my mind.
I would also point out, while it's likely Kyle Tucker will open the season up as the number 2 hitter, Michael Brantley shouldn't be long. And I believe Dusty Baker said he was going to bat Michael Brantley second when he was healthy anyway. So I would guess Kyle Tucker is going to move down whenever Michael Brantley's healthy, which is frustrating and annoying, and we can gnash our teeth and whinge about it all we want, but Dusty Baker's going to do what he does.
And they might just win a World Series.
Pretty successful manager.
To answer the question too, like I don't know that there's anything Kyle Tucker can do while Michael Brantley is out to keep the number 2 spot in the lineup. It's just that's the way Dusty Baker, whenever Michael Brantley has been healthy, that's the way he's constructed the lineup.
I think it's more likely Jeremy Pena struggles and loses that spot than anything else.
All right, well, let's take our first break here, and when we return, we'll get some more questions on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Italy's best clubs and brightest stars bring show-stopping skills and unbelievable thrills in the fight to the finish for the Scudetto. Stream every Serie A match live on Paramount+.
Ever dream about buying a Fantasy Baseball Today podcast shirt and then jumping over to get a Yellowstone whiskey glass or Top Gun Maverick hat? Well, now you can with a brand new Paramount shop, which offers a mountain of merch from the Paramount shows and movies that you love. Shop official apparel, drinkware, and accessories inspired by over 150 fan favorite titles: Paw Patrol, Yellowstone, Top Gun, Star Trek, South Park, SpongeBob SquarePants, and your favorite CBS sports podcasts like Pick Six, Fantasy Football Today, and of course, Fantasy Baseball Today. Scan the QR code in the top right corner if you're watching on YouTube, or head to ParamountShop.com. Use the discount code LAUNCH20 for 20% off the entire store. Paramount Shop, where products are paramount. This next email is from Daniel. Hello, Rocky Colt and Tum Tum.
Those are the titular 3 ninjas.
Correct. A movie I've actually seen. I used to really enjoy the one with Hulk Hogan back in the day.
Ooh.
Love the show, but I want to challenge Scott's scarcity analysis a little bit, particularly in roto formats. I don't think supply and demand applies as strictly as Scott's 2023 analysis suggests, given the way roto scoring and lineups work. This is not a dig at Scott. He's among the best in the business, obviously, but I want to hear his response to these counterpoints. For example, Scott has been saying all offseason that he is expecting a democratization of stolen bases due to the new rules, which are causing him to put less emphasis on drafting steals. But if there are more steals in the league, doesn't that mean you will need more to win or compete in the category? And if there are fewer home runs, you need fewer home runs to win. Scott, that's your first question.
Yeah, so I think I have addressed this before. Not sure if Daniel happened to catch that show, but basically the idea behind a democratization of stolen bases is that they will be more widespread. They won't be restricted to a few select players. So yes, stolen bases as a whole will go up, but they'll go up more in the mid to low range of base stealers than they were at the high range of base stealers, because there comes a point you're only on base so many times. And if you're running so much already, there's not as much room to improve in that regard. So that's part of the thinking there. And in my experience drafting, putting together roto teams this year, I find that a lot of the hitters I prefer to take in those middle to late rounds are likely to give me stolen bases. I mean, who are the guys I've been talking up? Like Ezekiel Tovar, Garrett Mitchell, Jake Fraley, more
Nico
recently,
Horner.
Anthony Volpe. Sure, I have a few shares of Nico Horner. You get to a point in the when you're looking for power deeper into drafts. I mean, the last guy who hit 30 home runs last year.
It's got frozen.
Drafts. So
he did freeze. Scott, can you repeat that?
Yeah, you were frozen for a second.
Last thing we heard was the last guy who hit 30 homers last year.
Sorry.
And we thought you took a very meaningful pregnant pause.
Of all the players who hit 30 plus home runs last year, the last to be drafted on average is Rowdy Tellez. And that's like in the middle of drafts. Right. So there aren't a lot of surefire power sources late. And the guys who you can, maybe see hitting 30 home runs, they have some serious warts. I'm thinking like Adam Duvall. I'm thinking like Jorge Soler, that group. So I feel much better about the late round targets for steals. That's kind of an aside, but it helps with the idea of not stressing about stolen bases early in drafts. The other point you brought up here about it not being as big of an issue in roto leagues. Yeah, I think that's true. And it's something I've brought up before. The fewer it's the position scarcity thing matters more the shallower the league is and the fewer lineup spots you have to fill, because you have to make those lineup spots as impactful as possible. If you get in a roto league where there's 14 hitter spots, and if it's especially one of those 15 team roto leagues that the industry people like to play in so much, you're not going to be able to fill in every lineup spot with a with a surefire high-end option anyway. Like there are going to be some misses somewhere on your roster. And if it happens to be at third base rather than middle infield, is it that big of a deal? I mean, it hurts your flexibility over the course of the season. So it's still not great, but it's not as big of a deal.
All right. The next part of this question asks, Scott is pushing down starting pitchers because he thinks the middle class of SP is so large now due to the deadened ball. I was going to say drink, but wouldn't that mean everyone in your league has better ratios and more strikeouts? So you need elite starting pitchers to compete in those categories and pull away from the middle class. The landscape is different than 15 to 20 years ago when you could wait on starting pitchers because pitching analysis is better and more widespread than it was then.
That's a really good point that I think is really interesting to think about, because part of why pitching for so long was not worth paying up for was just like we were less sure that we knew who was good and who wasn't. I think that's less of an issue now. I think it's easier to project hitting because there is still less out of a hitter's control in terms of their results. But, we know the guys who can throw 180 innings at a high level, those are the guys that can keep throwing 180 innings at a high level. A lot of like Spencer Strider, I think, is a good example of a guy that we really like. We think he's a really, really good pitcher. But one, the sample size for him pitching at this level is very small. And two, we've never seen him throw 150 innings in a season. And so that is partially why my pitching strategy largely does revolve around getting two of those guys that I feel very confident can throw 180 innings at a really high level. And then, have fun getting my Reed Detmers and Nick Lodolos and those guys, rather than, so at least I have that relative security to build my staff from. That is partially like, it's sort of like running back in fantasy football, where like there are a handful of guys, and I think draft history proves this. There are a handful of guys who are very, very good investments. And it's typically the guys who have shown they can get 250, 300 touches multiple times and play at a high level. Those guys are worth the investment. And then you have that RB dead zone that in fantasy football, it's like rounds 3 through 7 typically are just like the worst investments you can make are running backs. Historically, at starting pitcher, that's typically like rounds 5 through 11 is where the worst investments tend to be pitchers, because that's where the small sample size guys, the guys who've never done it, the guys who had a good second half tend to get pushed up and tend to be really bad investments historically, whether you want to look at it as, dollar investment or, however, Mike Gianella has done really good research on this. Ariel Cohen also has, and I've done slightly less good research, but I think it's still useful. Those guys are much smarter than me. But historically, that has been the trend. If you take pitchers in the first 3 to 5 rounds, you're going to get a good return on investment generally. After that, 5th through 11, you don't get as much of an edge picking 5th through 11 round range. You don't get enough of an edge on those types of pitchers relative to the guys who go later, is the way I would put it.
The difference between starting pitchers and the running back comparison you made is that it's really hard to find a quality running back off the waiver wire over the course of a fantasy football season. And now that there is such a big middle class at starting pitcher, it's very easy to find a quality starting pitcher off the waiver wire, multiple starting pitchers off the waiver wire over the course of the season. I went back and looked at some of my most successful teams from last year. And if you had showed me what my pitching staff ended up being in those leagues at the start of the year, I would have thought there's no way that's going to be a competitive team. But there are just so many options we don't even see coming over the course of the season. I mean, go back to the Mount Rushmore, Merrill Kelly, Martin Perez, Miles Michaelis, and Tyler Anderson. They all finished as top 40 pitchers in Roto League's top 30 pitchers in head-to-head points. And they were basically on nobody's radar at the start of the season. And those aren't the only 4 examples, of course. We could go through the rankings and pick out a bunch more. Jeffrey Springs.
Nestor Cortez.
Yeah. I mean, even like Nick Lodolo and Hunter Green, they were getting some late round looks toward the end of spring training, but certainly they weren't rostered from start to finish in every
Spencer
league.
Strider and Kyle Wright were both ads last year.
I mean, we could go on for a long time naming names. And I think, obviously I'm not wanting to go into the season with a bad pitching staff. I don't feel like I do in any of the teams I put together, but there's a lot more ways to wriggle out of a bad pitching staff. It's a lot easier to do than to wriggle out of a bad hitting lineup.
Lastly, this thinking applies to some of the position depth discussions as well. If 8 teams have an elite shortstop or 7 teams have an elite first baseman, aren't the teams that don't have one at a big disadvantage, even if the relative quality of the 12th shortstop is better than the 12th second baseman? Most teams will have a mediocre second baseman, so you're not too disadvantaged if you don't have one of the top 3. And why not double dip or triple dip at shortstop? Shortstop typically get more plate appearances due to their defensive importance. I won my league last year with and decided to keep all 3 of Lindor, Corey Seager, and Willy Adames.
I mean, that's part of the reason why I stress taking a third baseman earlier over stressing taking a second baseman earlier. Yes, there are fewer high-end second basemen, but because there are more high-end third basemen and they're even higher in than the high-end second baseman, you're at a more extreme disadvantage if you don't get one of them. So it's a situation where you give yourself a clear advantage taking... I mean, Jose Altuve is gone now, so I don't even know how well the example works. But let's say Marcus Semien. You give yourself a clear advantage over every opponent by taking Marcus Semien at second base, but you put yourself at a clear disadvantage if you don't get one of those 6 elite third basemen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, apologies for Daniel just taking over the podcast, but I thought it was, really,
it was good
discussion and conversation points. Let's move into our Apple Podcast review questions. This one's from Cups 1234. Any guys going especially late in Yahoo leagues, specifically that I could target in my draft? So, and I probably should have done this earlier. We usually do like a podcast where we point out like Yahoo, ESPN differences in rankings and all that fun stuff. I mean, ESPN is just the wild, wild west. I think they have a very specific scoring system. I think they lose 1 point for a strikeout. So players who strike out are like really, really pushed down the board. Mm-hmm. But I did it for both. I'll start with Yahoo. Kodai Senga. These are all players that are at least 20 picks below ADP. And Kodai Senga is at 195. Rowdy Tellez at 201. Love that. Nico Horner at 206. Love it. Jordan Walker at 224. They probably just haven't updated it, I would imagine. Merrill Kelly at 244. Jack Flaherty at 266. Tristan Casas at 279. And Anthony Volpe down at 310. So those are some late round names in Yahoo, ESPN, Ronald Acuna is at 18. Julio Rodriguez is at 21. Bo Bichette is at 34. It has to be something where maybe steals don't matter as much. Strikeouts hurt you more. I think a lot of people probably play in that kind of specific points league format on ESPN. And then later on, Andres Jimenez at 145, Byron Buxton at 151, Tim Anderson at 155, Jeremy Pena 163, Giancarlo Stanton at 167. You know that Chris didn't make these rankings. Tyler O'Neill at 173, Jake McCarthy at 191, and Grayson Rodriguez all the way down at 244. Anything you guys want to highlight in particular?
It's hard. So it's hard to have an answer to this one just because, like you said, the different scoring formats. And I'm planning on writing this type of piece, but I haven't done it yet. So I don't have any specific answers yet. I'm sorry.
Okay. Run out of time, Chris.
Doing it tomorrow.
If anyone wants to know, I mean, if you just search fantasy baseball ADP on Google, the first link will be Fantasy Pros, and you can compare and contrast ESPN, Yahoo, CBS, Fantrax, NFBC all on one page. And so if you want to, do it that way, I think you could probably find some sleepers. That's exactly how I did it. So.
I mean, so much of it, like ADP is obviously, it's only so valuable. That's part of the issue here. Like, how savvy are your league mates, and how, like, are they aware of Jordan Walker? Because Jordan Walker in our mock drafts recently has gone more around pick 100 than pick 224. I don't seriously see him on on March 23rd, a week from opening day, with the assumption he's going to make the opening day roster. I don't see him lasting outside of pick 200. So that's the sort of thing I feel like you should just ignore ADP. And, other more established players that haven't had as much reason to rise up the rankings, like Rowdy Tellez, Nico Horner, Merrill Kelly, like perhaps you could use that to your advantage more, studying that. But again, it all comes down to how savvy are your league mates, because if they're the sort of people who drink up fantasy baseball content all preseason, you could probably throw site-specific ADP out the window and look more toward Fantasy Pros ADP.
My last point on that is I would say go into the draft room beforehand and just poke around and see which players are ranked way too low, someone that might get buried that everyone kind of misses out on and forgets in the middle of the draft. So just look around each position, and I'm sure you'll be able to find some players that are buried that way as well. This one's from Casey022, 5x5 Roto, 10-team league. Keep forever Oneil Cruz or Jordan Walker.
I would say, so I guess the way I would look at it is this. We're drafting Oneil Cruz a lot higher than Jordan Walker, and I think we would be even if Jordan Walker got his opening day job, right? Would you guys agree with that?
I don't know that it would be a lot higher, but I think it would still be
like
higher.
Round 5 versus round 7, maybe.
He'd be higher. Can we really say Jordan Walker has more upside than Oneil Cruz?
No.
I don't think we can.
No.
So what I guess the case would be that you can like narrowly see a world where like Jordan Walker, who has not proven his skill set at the major league level, is nonetheless a safer long-term bet than Oneil Cruz, even though we think he's a worse bet this season and we don't think he has one. Like it's possible that all those things could simultaneously be true, but it feels like you're really trying to thread a very thin needle. And I would just go with Oneil Cruz.
It comes down to likelihood of meeting the upside. And I do feel like Walker is, just because Cruz has those exorbitant strikeout tendencies. Like that is the easiest way to undermine all the ability in the world. And I do think there's a scenario where at this time a year ago, everybody's kind of over Oneil Cruz. Obviously, that's not what I'm expecting to happen, but it could happen.
He could go Joey Gallo, yeah.
So I don't think there's a wrong answer, but I'm kind of leading Jordan Walker.
Oh God, does that mean?
But then shouldn't Jordan Walker just be ranked higher this year?
Well, no, because it's keep forever. Like I'm hitching my wagon to this guy forever versus I'm hitching my wagon to this guy this year. Normally, we're talking in redraft terms.
Right. But if you think Jordan Walker has a better chance of hitting his long-term ceiling,
I'm
why?
but I'm
why
not
is
thinking long
it?
term. I'm thinking
we
short
think
term. I'm
Right,
willing
right.
to accept. What I'm saying is, I'm willing to accept more volatility in the short term than in the long term, which I think is reasonable.
I think
okay.
both answers could be different, Chris. I think you could like Oneil Cruz more for redraft. Even if we knew Jordan Walker's up on opening day, he plays the entire season with the Cardinals. I think you can like Cruz more this year, but still like Walker long term.
I think you could. I have a hard time reconciling them. I think it's close, I think there's so much uncertainty either way that I think the short term should be the most valuable thing.
I think I would lean
to break the tie, Frank, or not?
I think I would lean Jordan Walker. I just trust the Cardinals' development a little bit more. I think there's a little bit less volatility.
I mean, look,
I don't know that there's a
Jordan Walker could be anything. He could even be Oneil Cruz.
Oneil Cruz,
and you know how much you want Oneil Cruz on your fantasy team.
Proven. Come on, Chris.
Chris strikes the same tone and makes the same facial expression every time he launches into that. I knew it was coming.
It's a bit, you know. I mean, we all got our things. You know, Chandler's got his could I be, you know, we got our things.
This next one's from Polo Rito. Dear Parzival H and Artemis with a 3 instead of an E.
That's something.
Art 3
for sure. I don't know what it is, but it's something.
Elon Musk's kids' names?
Oh my gosh.
It is Ready Player One.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like it might be a song by a band named Gunship. I have no idea.
It seemed like it could have been Elon Musk's kids' names. You got to admit.
In a head-to-head points 12-team league, the first overall pick got traded. Ohtani gets both scoring points in this format. Got traded for a first, second, and third rounder. So the winner of the trade gets 10th, 15th, 24th, 25th, 34th for the first 3 rounds. I don't know how that works out. Maybe
so that's the picks that he has now as a result of this trade.
Gotcha. And the commissioner who traded for first overall says we can't veto because there is not one in place. Thoughts?
I mean, yeah, if you don't have a rule about vetoes in place, and you shouldn't, then that's the rule. You can't retroactively decide that people can't be allowed to make a trade just because you don't like it. I think it's fine. I don't see the problem. I don't know why you would want to veto it.
Scott?
I mean, it's daily lineups. Is that part of this? That's why.
No,
Ohtani's
you
so
just
valuable?
get both Ohtani's hitting and pitching points. So
okay.
Probably,
Okay,
I would guess like 900 points last year.
yeah. So he's far and away the most valuable
Yeah.
player.
Aaron Judge was the number 1 player with 703, I think, last year.
Yeah. I mean, look what the Padres gave up to get Juan Soto last year. I mean, when you're trading for talent that high end, there's kind of no limit to what you can ask for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's reasonable. I mean, I understand being annoyed at, particularly if it's a good player, particularly if it's somebody who's won a lot of championships already, getting all those early draft picks. But you gave up clearly the most valuable asset for your league setup. So I think it's understandable.
I was trying to do some quick math here on how much Ohtani scored last year.
Almost 1,000 points. It's like just under 1,000, I think. That's, I mean, like, yeah. If he only takes up one roster spot and you get both hitting and pitching production, then there is an amount you could overpay.
Yeah.
But I have no, like, even if this is an overpay, that's not a reason to veto it. You don't veto trades because one team got better. That's not how it should work.
Yes, no, I agree totally. I am not in favor of vetoes.
We usually don't have this conversation until in season.
Right.
But vetoes should be used very, very sparingly. And if you're willing to veto a trade, you should be preparing to have a conversation about whether the people involved in the trade are in the league moving forward. That is my position on vetoes. If you're willing to say that teams should not be able to control their own decision-making, then you're saying you don't trust those people to run their teams, which why are they in your league then?
Agree completely. Let's take our second break here, and we'll get to more questions on the other side. Fantasy Baseball Today.
Those players bracing for Amen Corner at the Masters have nerves of steel.
Yeah, well, that's what it takes to cut through the fire, buddy.
It's a tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
Make sure to download and follow our 5-minute podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, wherever you listen to podcasts. This next question is from a name that featured a lot of T's and a bunch of other letters. So you probably know who you are. In a very competitive 14-team head-to-head points league, my opponents like to draft pitchers heavy as long as I have been in the league. At least half of the first round are pitchers. Does that mean I should seek starting pitcher as heavily as Scott seeks third base and outfield?
Nope. Don't get caught up in that. They're just leaving you the more valuable. They're leaving you more of the more valuable assets. And at some point, they're going to have to stop drafting pitchers and draft hitters instead. So just accept the gift. If they continue to do that, I don't know how long your league has been active, but as I've said many times throughout the preseason, the juice ball era lasted from going back to 2016. So it's a big adjustment for people to come out of it. And some leagues are going to be slower to come around to, okay, we don't need to go as wild for starting pitcher early. Some leagues are going to be quicker to come around to that than others. And if your league is slower to come around to it, that doesn't mean you should fall in line. That means you should thank your lucky stars that you're out ahead of the trend.
Chris, anything?
Zig whenever you're zagging, baby.
All right, this next one's from RNFJ. I'm in a 10-team, 25-man roster with 9 pitcher spots and a 10-inning weekly minimum. Head-to-head each category with standard 5x5. For Marmol Strategy, how early should I go in on relief pitcher? The top ones will go around the 5th round. Who and when should I target? So we've talked about the Marmol Strategy this offseason, basically every offseason ever. I mean, I think the original iteration is you draft hitters with like your first 10 rounds and then you load up, but I don't know that that's still relevant now today. I mean, if you want to make sure you get an elite closer or two, you probably need to jump in like the round 6, 7 range.
Well, that's actually a good point. And I'm not sure we've talked about this when we brought up Marmol Strategy before, which I'm not in favor of and have never really been in favor of, but I think it makes even less sense now at a time when big save getters are so scarce and their value has been driven up into the range where you really need to be drafting elite hitting to make the Marmol Strategy work. When the Marmol Strategy first started, closers were pretty plentiful and some really good ones would be available beyond round 10. And that's just not the way the player pool works anymore, the way drafts play out anymore. So that makes it like the key to the Marmol Strategy is you have to get really, really good hitting. Hitting is more predictable and you have easier ways to differentiate yourself from the competition. So in theory, it makes sense that if you load up on hitting early, you can be very confident you're going to dominate those categories. But if you're having to reach in to draft stud closers, then suddenly you're not so confident anymore.
Chris? You muted. You went from mute.
I muted myself because I thought I was muted. Yeah. I think that's generally the whole point. Like Scott said, you need to have that big predictable edge at your hitting categories, and that's harder to do if you're not investing a ton in it. I think it's still viable, but like you probably need to go, like maybe go get Emmanuel Clase A and then not draft another reliever for a long time. But yeah, it's harder now than it was in 2003, 2004 when you had twice as many 30 save guys and you had multiple 40 save guys every year. That's just not something that happens anymore. And to make that point, 2004, 2005, 2006, 16, 19, 19, 30 save pitchers. Last year, 10, the year before 9, the 3 years before that, 11. You just don't get as many high-end save totals, which could kind of maybe make the Marmol Strategy even more effective if you do get Emmanuel Clase A, because then like you've got one.
I don't know that Clase A is even the one I would target, because if you are going to divert from stud hitters to draft a stud reliever, it needs to be one who can give you a lot of strikeouts, which Clase A can't, because you need to be able to have a chance to win that pitching category. So
yeah, I mean, it
a
would
guy
have
who
been
could give
Edwin
you 100
Diaz.
plus. What's that?
It would have been Edwin Diaz.
Yeah. So, but like, I think I'd prioritize, I wouldn't take him ahead of Emmanuel Clase, but rather than being the one to take the first reliever, I'd take Josh Hader, or maybe like Evan Williams, somebody who has a chance for 100+ strikeouts.
All right, this next question is from Nicholas. Last year was my first fantasy baseball season, and I loved it. I want to join a second league and co-manage with a buddy. Do y'all know online leagues where we could join for money, $500 to $1,000 buy-in? Oh, big spender here. Also, show some love to 10-team head-to-head players, not just 12-team leagues. Keep up the great work. More on that in a second. So the NFBC is something we mention often here. It's the National Fantasy Baseball Championship. The actual link, I mean, if you just search NFBC, you'll find it on Google, but nfc.shgn.com. That'll bring you to NFBC. I think Fantrax has a bunch of leagues for money as well. So if that's what you're looking for, I'd imagine that most of our analysis translates in 10-team leagues, but they are different. So, I will bring that up. Any changes that stand out to you guys in terms of 10-team leagues versus 12-teamers?
I think as a general rule, the shallower the league is, the more important it is to have difference makers everywhere, because you have to find a way to differentiate yourself in a format where everybody's going to have very good players. So I think like actually having JT Realmuto in a 10-team league is probably a bigger edge than it would be in another type of format, because he can give you so much more of an edge. So I think that's the general way I would look at it.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, the position scarcity factor is greater the shallower the league is. I would also say that you can take much bigger risks in a shallower league, because the replacement level player on waivers is much higher end, and there's going to be really high quality players on waivers throughout the season. So you can afford to miss a little more with those big swings. I'm thinking especially with like your mid-late round picks, guys you're using to fill out your bench. I don't know that you need to take a huge swing early in the draft, because all those guys are so good to begin with. I would also say that you're saying 10-team head-to-head, so I presume no middle infield spot, no corner infield spot, only 3 outfielder spots instead of 5. Certain positions, those positions we think of as deeper, are so deep that you may still be able to get a really quality option at the very end of the draft. I'm thinking specifically shortstop, first base, and catcher. Unless you get a clear-cut stud at those positions, like JT Realmuto, or like Corey Seager and Oneil Cruz. I'd put them in that category. I'd be willing to pay up for them in a shallow league. Or at first base, an example would be Paul Goldschmidt. Maybe like a Vinny Pasquantino is the lowest that I'd consider paying up for at first base. Unless you can get that caliber of player at those positions, you can afford to wait a long, long time. There's no reason to pay up for Xander Bogaerts, for instance, because Dansby Swanson might be there in one of the last 4 or 5 rounds.
All right, let's wrap up with a few keeper questions. I said like a month ago, no more keeper questions, and here we are. But it's the final weekend. You might have to make your decision. From Sebastian, 10-team 6x6 head-to-head categories with quality starts and OPS. I plan on keeping these 5. Trey Turner in the 17th round, Juan Soto in the 21st, Ronald Acuna in the 8th, Yordan Alvarez in the 24th, Corbin Burns in the 23rd. I know it's a 10-team league, but I don't really see how you could lose. But could also keep these. Oneil Cruz in the 26th, Spencer Strider in the 26th, Tyler Glasnow in the 26th, Christian Javier in the 23rd, Shane Bieber in the 9th, Aaron Nola in the 7th. Scott, would you take any of those options over the 5 already listed?
That would be hard to do. I mean, obviously Oneil Cruz in round 26, Spencer Strider in round 26. Those are amazing options. Would either be worth keeping over Ronald Acuna in round 8? I mean, that's probably the most justifiable non-keep of those 5 that you've penciled in to keep. But Ronald Acuna in round 8 is...
I think given the value Sebastian already has, just go with Acuna.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could work out a trade to deal one of those. I mean, I don't know what you'd get in return, draft picks or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But one of those amazing keeper values, it seems like a shame to just let them disappear, let them evaporate. But I don't know if trading's an option for you.
This one's from Bill in Florida. Hi, Terry, Austin, and Larry.
Don't know that one.
Chris actually had to run, so or else I'm sure he would figure it out. I don't know. They're so like generic names. It's kind of hard to think of off the top of your head. 12-team head-to-head points league. Keep 4 up to 3 years in the same round they were drafted. Cedric Mullins in the 21st for. I'm not going to read the years. You can see it on the rundown, Scott. Mullins in the 21st. Swanson in the 21st. Kyle Wright in the 21st. Dylan Cease in the 7th. Brandon Nimmo in the 21st. Corbin Carroll in the 21st. And Freddie Peralta in the 17th. Need 4.
4 of them. All right. Definitely going Corbin Carroll in the 21st. Dansby Swanson in the 21st. I don't know if that means it becomes the 20th. I don't know. And I guess Mullins also in the 21st, which maybe becomes the 19th. I don't know. Yeah, I think. Well, I'm sorry. It's a points league. Okay, sorry. Still Corbin Carroll. All right. I should have seen that points thing earlier because now I'm gonna throw everybody a curveball here. Okay, still Corbin Carroll in round 21, but now I think I'm gonna keep Dylan Cease in round 7. And because in that format, especially, outfield is a scarcer position than shortstop, Mullins will be the 3rd. So I'm leaving Dansby Swanson out of it now.
Need 4.
What do you think of that? Oh, well, that makes it easier. Swanson too. There you go.
All right, this last one's from
Total mess.
I feel your pain, dear Johnny, Chosen, and Mike.
So is that Cobra Kai? I mean, I haven't seen the show Cobra Kai, but those sound like characters from the Karate Kid movie who were on the bad side.
Yes, it sure is. And okay. I'm a big fan. I know a lot of people, I don't know, it's kind of divisive. It is what it is. Like, it's kind of cheesy, but I think it's a fun show. Wish you guys would cover more head-to-head points, but you're still the best around. The best around. I see what you did there. All right. Karate Kid bringing it all around. Keeper question for a 12-team weekly head-to-head points league. Can keep 6. Already keeping Trout in round 1. Ohtani, the pitcher, in round 12. Austin Riley in round 24. Alek Manoah in round 23. And Gunnar Henderson in round 22. Trying to decide my last keeper between Vinny P.
Baby.
Vinny Pasquantino round 21 or Zach Wheeler in round 3.
You already got 2 ace pitchers. Points leagues probably going to be Pasquantino's better format. I think that discount is pretty extreme around 21, and the discount for Wheeler round 3, I'm not even sure that's a discount. So yeah, I think this is one of those cases where you go with the bigger discount in Pasquantino, even if he's presumably the lesser player.
Last point here. P.S. You guys keep talking about how weak Sparps are this season, but you never mention Christian Javier or Jeffrey Springs on Fantasy Pros and Yahoo. They're both listed as SP and RP.
Well, you know what? This isn't the Yahoo Fantasy Baseball Today podcast, okay? Can't speak for those Yahoos over there with their crazy loose eligibility rules. But obviously, if they are RP eligible and you play... does Yahoo even do points leagues? I assume you can set it up that way, but it's not what they're known for.
I think their standard is head-to-head categories. Honestly, yeah. I don't even know. I don't know if you could do head-to-head points there.
If you happen to play on a points league on yahoo.com, then yes, Christian Javier and Jeffrey Springs are some very valuable Sparps that make it so you don't have to reach so much for Spencer Strider if you're into that sort of thing, but obviously also raise the value of Javier and Springs.
And the reason why Javier and Springs don't have RP eligibility on CBS is because you need 10 relief appearances the year before. I think Springs either had 8 or 9. Javier, I think, had exactly 5. So if you do play in a league on CBS where it's only 5 relief appearances, then yes, those guys definitely should be on your radar as Sparps. Others who might have this eligibility: Ross Stripling, David Peterson, and Shintaro Fujinami. We are going to wrap there for... Scott,
I don't think Fujinami would, coming over from a different league.
But I looked on Yahoo and he has SP and RP eligibility.
Oh, okay.
We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for watching and listening Fantasy Baseball Today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. We'll be back again next week. Bye-bye.